Hello everyone and welcome back to our bizarre and unusual world. Today I'm going to be covering a unsolved true crime case, and that is the case of Christa Helm. So as usual for my series here, I like to cover the who, the what, the when, where, why, and how of the case at hand. So let's start with the who. Who exactly was Christa Helm? Christa was born November 11, 1949 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Her birth name was Sandra Lynn Wolfell, and she would later change it to Christa Helm. Her parents split up when she was around 3 years old, and for a while her and her sisters lived with her mother, but unfortunately that home environment became very toxic and just not a good place to be, so they ended up moving in with their father and his new wife. Christa was described as being very outgoing and of course telling everyone that she would be a star someday. And some people saw that as very wild and untamed. In a small town, she was definitely seen as a wild child. So at 16, Christa actually became pregnant after briefly dating a guy named Gary Clemens. Now he was 26, so like 10 years older than her. Yuck. Like I realize it's like the 60s and things were different back then, but still, she was 16. So because of her pregnancy, they went ahead and got married, shotgun wedding style, quickly. Not that that really mattered or lasted, because Christa would actually wake up in their honeymoon suite at a hotel and Gary was gone. He bounced. No one really knows fully what happened to him, although Christa would later tell stories that he had moved to Florida and had died in a motorcycle accident. So skipping ahead to the what exactly was Christa known for? And that would be kind of fame or her connections to fame within New York and California, but she kind of had to work her way up to that. When her daughter was about 2 years old, Christa decided to move to New York to pursue a career in modeling and acting. Her daughter was left behind with a family friend. I guess Christa saw this as a way to support and care for her child if she could get modeling gigs and whatnot, so she did leave her behind. And Christa was beautiful. She had at one point had connections to like the Playboy bunnies, and her friend had auditioned to be bunnies, and they got it, but her friend ended up not being able to go with her, so Christa backed out. So she was already kind of ready for fame when she moved by herself to New York. So this was just like another chance for Christa to get that fame. In New York, she was a waitress, but she also was making connections, dating, and living her best life. It wasn't actually long before she met a wealthy Broadway producer named Stuart Duncan. Now, he helped her and her career move along fairly quickly. He helped her with money and investing some of that, and she got a lot of money back out of that. So she was no longer struggling. She moved to a nice apartment, she was doing really good, her modeling seemed to be going well, and Stuart Duncan also helped her get her first acting role. In 1974, she starred in Go for Broke. Now, this movie really didn't do well. It was only in theaters for a handful of days, and the movie itself went so off budget, it really tanked. But Christa did not let that stop her. She decided to make the jump from New York to California. And fairly quickly, she got in with like the inner circles of Hollywood. I mean, it wasn't hard for her. She was a beautiful girl. She loved to party. She just fit right in with that crowd. It was perfect for her. Now, while she was surrounded by the right people and all of these famous faces, she herself wasn't actually getting many roles. She only has 4 acting credits on her IMDb page. A movie named Legacy of Satan, Let's Go for Broke, and some small parts in Wonder Woman and Starsky and Hutch. At one point, Christa even tried her hand at music. She was signed with Casablanca Records and she tried out disco music. There are claims that Christa would submit stories about herself to like gossip columns to keep her name in the press or try to get her name up there with some of the famous faces that she was hanging around with. Now, Christa had quite a list of boyfriends, or bed buddies, you could say. And when I say list, I literally mean a list, because Christa kept a diary of all of her sexual encounters. Now, people have connected her to famous faces like Mick Jagger, Jack Nicholson, Warren Beatty, George Hamilton, Roman Polanski, and even the Shah of Iran. I guess he had like gifted her jewels to wear and whatnot. But yes, Christa kept a diary of all of it. A childhood friend said that they started that as teenagers, and she just continued it as she started to hook up with more famous faces. She would like rate people from 1 to 10 after she slept with them. What started as like an innocent teenage diary turned into like a gossipy, juicy Hollywood scandal, considering the company that she kept. And people said that she was very open about her relationships or her sexual encounters. She was just that type of person that would openly talk about it and didn't really mind at all. And it even goes a step further because apparently she also had recordings of some of her encounters with some famous people and other people in general. She recorded it on like cassette tapes of some of those experiences. So she's writing about all the experiences that she has in Hollywood and who with, and she has these audio tapes. I found it funny. There's actually an interview from 1994 with Katie Couric interviewing Burt Reynolds, and he talks about how in the 70s he slept with some beautiful blonde woman, and after they were finished, she pulled out a notebook and started writing. She told him that she was ranking their sex, and he wanted to know how he ranked. Now, there's no proof that that was Christa, but I mean, it sounds pretty similar. So why document everything? For just curiosity? For blackmail? Was she gonna write a book someday? So then we come to the when and where of this case, and it turns tragic. The when and where for this case is where Christa was unfortunately murdered. On February 12th, 1977, Christa and her roommate went out to a party. During the party, Christa ended up taking her roommate's car and headed over to a man's house named Sandy Smith. Now, he worked for a talent agency, but it's noted that he wasn't actually like Christa's agent or anything like that, but they knew mutual people and things of that nature. Some suspect that she was trying to get him to come out and party with them, or maybe talking about a role. I mean, we don't really know why she decided to go over to his place that night. So Christa did make it to his house, outside of his house, and unfortunately, that is where she was murdered. Witnesses report hearing a car suddenly stopping and what sounded like an altercation and screaming. When a neighbor went to investigate, he didn't see anything, and that's sadly because he didn't like step far enough out into the street. If he would have stepped off the sidewalk, he would have seen Christa's body. She was partially laying under a car in the street, bleeding out. So Christa had been stabbed around 27 times around her face, her neck, her chest, and her stomach. And it also looked as if she had been beaten by some sort of object. They suspect it was the handle of the knife. Christa did have quite a bit of defensive wounds. She did try to fight back. She had training in martial arts, but it was just too much to handle. There was too much damage from the stab wounds, just like too much trauma for her body to handle. A man named Thurman Brooms found her on the street. He was an owner of a limo service, and he was reportedly also heading over to Sandy's house that night. He claims that he saw her take his last breath, but we don't know if that's accurate because we don't really know how long it was between when she was attacked and when he found her. Police state that it was a very violent and passionate crime, and they do not think that it was random. She was lying flat on her stomach and partially tucked under a car. Her toxicology showed no signs of barbiturates or alcohol in her system. The murder weapon was never found. Also, her purse was missing. The purse that she carried that diary in. So the diary was missing as well. So why? Why was she killed? There's a couple theories. The first theory came from the police, and the news and the media loved this theory. They suggested that Christa's death had to do with another celebrity death that had happened a year earlier. 1 year to the day, an actor named Sal Mineo was murdered in a similar fashion. He was most known for starring with James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. Sal was stabbed the same day a year earlier in the same neighborhood, and there were no witnesses. When they were looking at his killer, at first they thought that he had been locked up at the time that Christa had been murdered. But years later they discovered that he had actually been out of jail when she was murdered. So was it him? Did he have the passion or the connection to attack her in such a very violent way? But there are a lot of whys on why she could have been killed. One theory is jealousy. She slept around with a lot of people. She didn't really do relationships, which is fine, but a lot of those people had significant others. So did somebody get jealous because she hooked up with their girlfriend or their boyfriend and they attacked her because of it? There is also the big idea that she was being silenced. She knew something about someone in Hollywood. Was it in that diary? The diary was never found. She was too far in. She knew something and they shut her up. I mean, Hollywood is dark, guys. Like, it's dark. A friend of her claims before she died, Christa actually sent her a card stating she was way over her head. She was overwhelmed with what she was dealing with at that time. So it also needs to be noted that a lot of Christa's things went missing after she was murdered. Tony Sirico, who is known for his Sopranos role nowadays, but in 1977 he was just an upcoming actor. He kind of ran in the same sort of circle as Christa. So after she was killed, he was, I guess, sent to her apartment to check up on the roommate, is the story. But he ended up leaving with some of those sex tapes, some of her fancy fur jackets, and some other clothing that he took with them. Sounds kind of sketchy. Like, was he protecting himself? Was he protecting somebody else? What were on the tapes that he took, and why did he take the other items? At that time, in 77, he was not questioned. There's also another theory or spin on why she was murdered. Remember I said that she started doing music? Well, there was drama within the producer, the band, and the backup singers. So supposedly, Christa had a relationship with one of her backup singers, Patty Collins, and Patty did not like the idea of sharing Christa. But as I've said, Christa wasn't really into relationships. She went with the flow, she lived her life. She wasn't really committed to anyone. It's also suggested that she flirted with the other backup singer, Debbie Danilo. So was Patty jealous of this? Was there just massive jealousy tension forming within that music studio? And did that jealousy turn deadly? So how is the case today? As you can imagine, back then, eventually the case went cold. However, 30 years later, Christa's daughter was able to convince them to reopen the case in 2006. There are pros and cons with opening a cold case like that. You get a fresh pair of eyes and another chance at catching her killer, right? But also, it's been years. A lot of people aren't around anymore to question, and some of the evidence is a little sketchy. For instance, the man that found her body died a year later. Some of her circle of friends had also passed away. It just makes things difficult when you can't interview someone that's already died. They were able to interview Tony Sirico again. The detectives claim that he wasn't very helpful. At first, he didn't remember knowing her or knowing that she was killed at all. So of course, he didn't remember taking those tapes. But slowly he started to remember knowing her. But when they started to ask where he had been the day and the night that she was murdered, his lawyer put an end to all of the questioning. Later on, some of her missing items had actually ended up at a friend's house as well, which is kind of weird. She had met this man while she was in New York. He was a fashion designer and they actually became really close friends, and some of her missing items ended up at his place. His name was Lenny Barron. Some people suggest that maybe it was her friend Lenny that sent Tony to get those sex tapes and those other things to help protect her image or keep some of the more sexual things hush-hush, but there's no evidence of why he had those things. People question that if he has some of the things, does he have those missing tapes still and the diary that went missing? We will never know because he actually passed away before the case was reopened. There are some people that came forward as well saying that a man named Rudy Mazzella was overheard bragging that he had been the one that killed Christa. Now, he was like a drug dealer, he had a bad reputation, and was known to be quite violent. So did he kill Christa, or was it just something to say around town to boost his reputation? With more modern technology, they have been able to test the DNA that was found underneath Christa's fingernails because she fought back, remember? And the DNA belongs to a woman. They have tested people close to the case, such as the backup singers. Debbie was proved that it's not her DNA. They had to hunt down Patty, and when they found her in this documentary that I watched, she seemed very off, And she claimed she didn't know Christa, and she was never in a band in California, and it couldn't be her. But like I said, she did seem a little off in her interview. They did take her DNA, but they didn't say if it was a match. I imagine if it was her DNA, there would be some sort of update to her case. But as far as I could find, they haven't released who the DNA belongs to that was under her fingernails. So what do you guys think about this case? It is definitely one of those like Hollywood dream cases that turns very sad and tragic. I do hope that the DNA tech is able to one day give her daughter closure on who murdered her mom. So what do you guys think? What theory do you think suits best?
I tend to think that she might have just gotten way too deep in to Hollywood and she knew some dirt on someone. She had it on the tapes or her diary. Now, it could just be a coincidence that her purse was missing because, you know, you steal a purse. But she was also known to carry that diary around with her everywhere, so it could have easily been a target to get that diary and whatever was in it away from Christa. What's like really creepy and unfortunate is in one of her movies, her character is actually like stabbed to death at the end. I hate when coincidences like that happen. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.
Hi. You kind of like her, don't you?
Yes. I think she isn't as hard as she would like to be.
Good. It's always nice to make new friends.